الآن يمكنكم المشاركة في مبادرة الأيام الرقمية تحت شعار انطلق بقوة مع جوجل، والتي يتناول فيها خبراء جوجل عناوين جديدة أسبوعيا مثل السحابيات، مهارات من جوجل، أندرويد، فلتر، ذكاء الآلة، فايربيس، ديزاين ثينكينج، مقسمة إلى دورات وورشات عمل يومية بالإضافة إلى مسابقات أسبوعية. شاهد الأيام الرقمية مباشرة على اليوتيوب وشارك رأيك وأسئلتك مع خبراء جوجل، واحصل على شهادة حضور في كل محاضرة تشترك فيها. هذا وأكثر من الأحد إلى الخميس ابتداء من الساعة 9 بتوقيت دبي عبر الرابط المبين youtube.com/gdgmena.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. أهلا بكم في عدد جديد من MENA ديجيتال دايز. سأكون معكم بإذن الله عليان عبد النور، جي تيزي وزو الجزائر. خلال هذه الساعة أين سنتعلم أشياء جديدة عن لينكس وعن الكلاود. الحلقة ستكون بالإنجليزي. إذا كانت لديكم أي أسئلة يمكنكم طرحها وسنحاول الإجابة عليها بإذن الله. As usual, good evening everyone. Hello everyone. I will be with you, Aliane Abdenour, GTGTZuzu, and together we are going to learn new stuff about Linux, about cloud, about Google Cloud. Today, this is like a networking primer. So in next sessions, we will discover a lot about this because networking, this is not an easy topic. This is a large topic, but we are going to see them one by one, step by step. So let's start. So before we talk about the networking in Linux, I need you to understand the Osi model. So the OSI, this is this model because when you are working with people using networking, people, they will not tell you, hey, I'm going to use the application presentation session. They will just tell you, I'm using the layer 1, layer 2, layer 3, layer 4, 5, 6, 7. Now, what are those layers? They are just, let me show you something. This is my computer. And this is your computer or your mobile phone where you are seeing this session. So if we don't see the computer as it is, we just see the network. So here there is a kind of networking, and then you are seeing something where I am here. I am using a browser, I'm drawing this thing right now. You are seeing what I am using right now. So when I write, you see what I am writing. When I draw, you see what I am drawing. So to send this to you, I need to convert this to electricity, to 1001 and so on. This is what is transmitted over network, over electricity at the end of the day. So to do this, I need to convert this message, because we just call it a message right now. And then I need, every time I send it to a layer, to make it simpler. So this is a complicated design. I need to bring it back to simple electrical stuff where only 1 and 0 that will be sent. And once you get to your home or to your router, and then the message will be rebuilt so you can see the message as it is. Those layers are the OSI layers. So as you can see, the top layer is what we use as a user. And the bottom layer, this is what is near to the computer, to the electricity. So we are using what I am drawing now, the HTTP protocol. This is an application layer. This is layer 7. And then we are using the layer 4 for TCP that we are going to see in a few minutes. And then we are sending it in the physical layer. But because we are using a router and a switch, So let me explain you something else. At home, we have the Wi-Fi router. This is what we call it. In reality, there are three stuffs inside this. We have a switch. The switch, this is where you see kind of RG. Let's talk about this later. And then we have the router. And then we have the modem. So the modem, its job is to convert the analog signal to a digital signal. This is modulation, demodulation. And then we have the switch. The switch, this is to understand which device is connected to it. And this is using the MAC address. This MAC address, this is a unique identifier. And then we have the router. This is the router that affects the IP address. So we need the MAC address, and then we need to associate it to some other address to send it outside, and this is the IP address. The IP address, this is used when we need another network. So we need to go outside our own network. We need an IP address. To use an IP address, we use a router. But inside the same address, we can use a switch. And the switch, it uses the MAC address. And then to contact two routers, we use what we call a gateway. So this is why when you use 192.168.1.1, we say this is the gateway address. This is an IPv4 IPv4 gateway address. Why? Because this is your modem address. So you get to your modem, to your router, or to your gateway, or whatever you want to call it, and then we configure it. But what we need now, we need the switch, and then we need the router. So those ones, the switch is here, is in layer 2, and then the network to have the IP address, we are here. So this is the router, and this is the switch. And here we use the TCP and UDP. So the role of TCP and UDP, this is generally where we use the firewall. So the firewall is in transport. And then here we use the router. This is where we affect your IP address. And then the switch, this is the MAC address. And when the switch is small, we call it bridge. Because in the past, this is what existed. So this is the bridge. And then when it's bigger, we call it switch. But when you go outside, you always find switch, even if it's small. But let's call it just switch right now, because in the past it was called bridge. So those are the layers, the OSI layers. Now, let's go to Linux. So to recapitulate, we use those OSI to make this message, to send this message to you, or to receive a message from you. So we need to go deeper, and then once the message is received, we go upper, which means that here I need an IP address, and then I go to the switch, to the MAC address, and then when you get the message, you get first the MAC, and then you get the IP. So anyway, we are going to go deeper in those concepts with time. So let's go now to Linux. And in Linux, right now I'm using Pop! OS. Pop! OS, this is like a distribution. This is a Debian distribution, which is based on Ubuntu, of course. Why I'm using this? Because Pop! OS, this is the easiest way to, let me show you. Oops. Not this. Anyway, this is the easiest way to use your machine with NVIDIA, with Optimus technology. So if you have a laptop and then you have NVIDIA and you have issues with Linux, just go with Pop OS. It will make it really easy for you in case you want, for example, to use TensorFlow with a GPU. So let's come to Linux, and I'm going to use, of course, the commands. And once we finish on my machine, I will go back and forth to GCP, to Google Cloud Platform. So let's start. So to get the information about networking, we need to understand that there is an issue, and the issue is that there are many information in internet, and from those information there are the old way and the new way, because there are many pages that are not updated. So in the past we need a command that is called ifconfig. This is the command that we used in the past. In ifconfig we were able to get the information about our network interfaces. So a network interface is what we use to connect. So we have many interfaces, and by default, every interface, it has this. Every machine, it has this interface, which is called the loopback. Now, what is the loopback? This is the 127.0.0.1. Every machine has its own loopback. That means that this is my own address. So I don't go outside the machine with this address. This is myself. So if I want to talk from, for example, my left hand to my right hand, I use a loopback address, and its name, it's always LO. And now if we want to go outside our machine, here we use those weird names. Now, why it's called like this? And this is why I told you that in the past, things were different than now. So if I come here, in the past, this one, it was called WLAN 0. So if I split this like this, and then let me use the other profile. So in the past, this is what you find, WLAN, and then if you have another interface, you will have WLAN 1, and so on, WLAN 2. And that was a problem. Why? Because in case you have a bug, and then WLAN 0 is not loaded, the first interface is not loaded, but the second one is loaded before, their name will change. The second interface will have this name, and the first interface will have this name. And it was a big mess. And same thing goes with this one. So let me bring this here. Where is it? I don't have, yeah, it's not connected. Anyway, so in the past, you will always have something like this, ETH0, ETH1, and this is Ethernet. And this is to attach your RG45 cable, the network cable. And this is called Ethernet. And if we come back here, we will find that Ethernet, it's in layer 2. So remember, that's why it's used with switches. So when you talk with people in networking, they will tell you, hey, this is layer 2. So they mean the data link. This is in layer 2. We have Ethernet, we have switch, and we have the bridge. So if I come back here, so things were different. So if you check your network, you will find ETH0 and WLAN 0 in case you have Wi-Fi. But now, the new kernel, they use different names depending on which type of interface do you have. Is it virtualized? Is it physical? Is it, for example, if you have Wi-Fi, an external Wi-Fi device using USB, Is it from D-Link? Is it from TP-Link? And all those brands. So everyone has its own name. So to not be lost, let me close this. The easiest way, I show you a bonus. This is just do just something like this. ls sys class net. Remember this command. Always use it. When you use this command, you will find all the names of your interfaces without using ifconfig. So this is what the kernel has given as names for your interfaces. So just use this command. It is available in all Linux distributions because this is the kernel. This command works on the kernel, so it should work. It should help you a lot. So now let me make a comparison and open Cloud Shell. Cloud Shell, as we said long ago, this is a way that Google Cloud simplifies the working on the cloud. So this is a temporary virtual machine that helps to make things easier. So let me zoom. This is too much. Okay. And if I do ls sys class, I think I need to zoom a little bit. As you can see here, I have three interfaces. I have Docker, I have ETH0, I have LO. As you can see, Google made it easier for people. Instead of seeing the name of the interface with a new way, they converted the name to ETH0 because this is what network people understand. Now, if I want to see what is the real name of this interface, I just need to do sudo dmspg and this command will show you what happened when the machine started. And because I just need to understand what's going on with the keyword ETH0, I use this and then I add grep ETH0. And because I want to search in a case, I don't want something like capital letter that make mistake when it's lowercase. So I do this, and as you can see, ETH0 renamed from VETHCCA and so on. So imagine that if this is the name of the interface, it will be a mess. So each time I create a session, there is a new interface that is affected for me. And when you find VETH, this is virtual Ethernet. So this is a virtual interface that was affected for me, and then it was renamed ETH0 to make it easier. So if I come back and take this command here, and then I passed it on my machine to check how the kernel named it, validate this. And as you can see, this is the inverse. It was named ETH0, and then the kernel, the Linux renamed it something like this to avoid confusion. So when you start a Linux machine, you will, if you execute this command, it will tell you that I found the name called ETH0, but I renamed it for you. But if you want to change the behavior of this Linux, you just search. I will let you do that by your own. Just there is a way, a simple configuration where it will stick with the old name. So if I search about WLAN 0, you will find that it was called WLAN 0, but now it was renamed to WLP2S0. So every time you are on virtual machine, you are in VMware, on VirtualBox, on Virt Manager, the ETH0 will be always renamed to something else. So in case you came from, for example, Cisco, or you came from old school Linux, be careful. You will not find ETH0. So if you want to check the real name, you just hit this command and you will find all the interfaces, how they are named. Now let's go back to what I was telling you, that ifconfig, you can run it and then tell you, hey, ifconfig doesn't work anymore. So if I try it here, it works. So let me try it where it will not work. So to do this, I just installed a fresh Ubuntu 18.04, and then I show you this. So I'm using Virtual Machine Manager, Virt Manager. The good thing about Virt Manager is that it's free, it's open source. And why I'm using now Virt Manager? Because this is the one that is like what is used in Google Cloud. Because Google Cloud doesn't use VMware, they don't use VirtualBox, they use KVM. KVM. So let me show you what is KVM. Okay. KVM, this is the technology that is used. So this is the kernel virtual machine. So KVM, this is, there is no KVM on Windows. This is why if you want to use KVM on Windows, you need to install a Linux and then go to KVM, but it's useless. This is why Windows, they have Hyper-V. So Hyper-V for Windows, the equivalent in Linux, this is KVM. But KVM itself, you cannot work on it directly. Google, they use their own technology on top of KVM. So KVM, if you want to use it by your own, you need QEMU. So QEMU, for quick emulation, this is user space. This is what we are interacting with the mouse and adding new virtual machine and so on. But the hypervisor itself, this is KVM. And then we are KVM and QEMU, they are connected with libvirt. So those three tools, they are the one that you will always use in Linux. So you have libvirt, and then you have QEMU, and then you have KVM. KVM, this is that operating system way to make the virtualization. QEMU, this is like the interface, and then those two, they are connected using libvirt. And this is exactly what we are going to see in few minutes in Google Cloud, but there is no QEMU. There is libvirt, and then there is KVM. So if I come back here, and I think now it started. Okay. So let me open this, and then I will zoom, don't worry. Okay. Okay, so if I do ifconfig, as you can see, it tells me, hey, ifconfig doesn't work anymore because it's deprecated. So in future, if you want to use ifconfig, you need to install this package that is called nettools. So if I do sudo apt install nettools, there is not only ifconfig, there is netstat, and there is ARP. I will tell you this like this. So if I do ARP, it tells me it doesn't exist. And if I do netstat, netstat exists. So ARP and route. Anyway, so in case those, by the way, ARP, this is the way how to associate a MAC address to the IP to know where to send the message. So now that I installed nettools, if I do ifconfig, now it works. But since this is a deprecated way, this is just for people who want to use the old way. If you want now to use the new way, you need this command, which is just name it IP. So if you use IP, as you can see, you have many parameters. Let me come back here, that's better. So if I use IP, it tells you what do you want. And in IP, this is a command that is responsible of a lot of stuff. This is not only about interfaces. This is about routes. This is about ARP. So if I want to do ARP, the way now you just do IP nay for neighbors. And as you can see, this is even faster and much more detailed. So the way that you use in the past ARP, now you need to convert to EP nay. Now, if I want to use the if config, I just use APA. APA, this is equivalent, let me do like this. So EPA, it's easy. This is not like this. This is an argument. This is the easiest way to remember. Just type IPA to list all the interface. So now, if I validate, everything works perfectly. Now, if I want only the interfaces, I type EP-link. So EP-link, this is for interfaces. Now, because what happens, check this out. If I do EPA and then I type twice tabulation, it gives me this. Let me hit the space. And as you can see, check this with EPA. Even if as you saw, the result was the same using EPA than EP-link. So if I add EP-link, as you can see with A, I'm using the addresses, but with link, I'm talking about the interfaces. So if I want now to make an interface up and down, in the past, I just do if up, and then I use the interface. For example, WLAN 0. This is the way how to set up our interface, to make it on. And if I want to make it off, I will do if down. This is the old way. But now, if I want to make the new way, let me do EP link and then set and then the name of the interface and then like this. I know this is a little bit long, but this is more like a sentence. This is like we are talking with the machine itself. So all of this just to tell you that now the old commands if up, if down, and if config, and IRP, all that, this is deprecated. So you need to come to the new way, IP. Now, in the past, we used netstat. Netstat, this is the way to check about the network statistics. So if I type netstat, it will give me what's going on my machine, the network statistics. But in this is the old way. Now you just type SS for socket statistics, and you will get the same result, but faster. So remember, netstat, I think in Windows it works, but now in Linux you need to use SS. And let me show you something. Let me do SS. I need to listen to TCP connections. So if I do only L, I will check about the connection. I will listen to the connection, but in TCP and UDP. And by the way, the difference between TCP and UDP, the TCP, when you send something, you need to receive a response. Imagine this is like a letter that you need to send. So in TCP, you cannot send a second message unless you receive the acknowledgement. But in UDP, you send without waiting for an answer, for a response. So if I do SSL, it will give me, it will listen for the traffic. But if I do LT, this is for TCP. And as you can see, there is this one, 1919. And this is the way for people using Kali Linux and all that to understand if they have been hacked or not. Because as you can see, there is something that is running on 1919. Let me check this. So let me run localhost host, and then let's check 1919. And as you can see, there is a server running on 1919. So if I type now my name, this is the graphical interface of this tool. So if you want to use virtual manager, you can use directly this, or you just use this one. And this one, this is called cockpit. So cockpit, so here is it. Cockpit. This is the new way to run your virtual machine. This is an hypervisor where you can run everything on a browser. So you can run cockpit or directly run the old virt manager. So all this to tell you that if I run, for example, Apache, then let's install it. Sudo apt install Apache. Then you will see what I'm talking about. So right now there is no port 80. As you can see, as you know, HTTP runs on port 80. So right now there is no port 18 in this command. There is no port 18. Now let's rerun this and check if it works. So waiting for this to end. Let's split this like this. And then use this profile. Now, if I do the same thing, as you can see, this is faster than netstat. So if you want to use netstat, just forget it and come to SS, but be careful. SS doesn't replace fully netstat. There are some commands where you need IP. So IP and SS, you need to learn them both. So let me check if it has been installed. By the way, this console is called Terminator. Terminator, this is like a console where you can split horizontally and vertically, and I think this is the default in Kali Linux. Okay, let's wait just a few seconds. It will install. And we can check this. Okay, waiting for this to install. Let's go back to our console. So if I do now SSLT on here, as you can see, there are some application. And this one, when you find 000, that means that everywhere. And then the SSH, that means 22 by default, but it's not always 22. This is the port name. So here is an example. When we type google.com, in reality, we don't need the port number. But if we want the port number, we need 443, like this. And this is, in reality, how it should work, but the browser, it make it easier for us. Why? Because we are using HTTPS. So this is what we call a protocol, and every protocol, it has a port name. So in network, we always use this syntax. We always use an IP address and a port, always. So if I want to use something like the address, the Google address, I will type something like this, 1, 2, 3, and 4. And then if I do 443, that means I can get rid of this and replace it with HTTPS. But if I want only HTTP, then at the end, I need to add 18 and not 443. So the browser make it easier for us to only type the name and not type the port. But if the server is listening to another port, here we need to explicitly tell the server that we are not listening to 443, something like 444. This is to avoid anyone getting access to your website. But don't do that if you want to expose your website for the public. Let's check again if it's installed. It's a mess because this machine is using HDD. So if you are using SSD, it will be really slow for you. Okay, let's go back to Google Cloud. Now, let me close Cloud Shell and let me open a new machine. Let me create one machine and then show you something. I will go to Google Cloud, Google Compute Engine. Compute Engine, by the way, this is a solution for AIS. This is infrastructure as a service. So if I create a new instance, and then you need to understand that if I come, for example, here, where is Virt Manager? Here. And if I come now and do TP link, I have this interface. Now, if I want to add more than one interface, I come here, add hardware here because everything is virtualized. And then in hardware, let me come to network and then check this out. You see Virt.io. Virt.io, this is the KVM way using libvirt, or you can use this way, the E1000. You can find it in VirtualBox and VMware, but let's choose Virt.io. And this is the MAC address. You can specify any MAC address, but there is one condition. You should never have the same MAC address in the same network. So let's finish. And if I come back now here and do billing, as you can see, I have a new interface. In the past, I only have this one. Now I created a new one. We can do the same thing in Google Cloud. Let me show you how we do that. In the machine creation, we just come to network here, network disk security management, and then we come to network. And here, check this out. The interface, we have two types. We can choose Virt.io or GVNIC. This is from Google. This is a Google technology. Or we can use the libvirt. So if we use the libvirt, this is about the bandwidth. So this one is better, the Google technology, because it handles much bigger than libvirt. So if I come here, as you can see, to create another network interface, you need to have a new network first. So to be able to create a second one, I need to come here, VPC network, and then in VPC network, let's create a new network, because in Google Cloud, we cannot create an interface without attaching it to a network. So by default, we have this network. So let's create a second one and test. Let's call it test. And the subnet, let's make it automatic. And let's create a new one. Everything is by default. So as you can see, every region has its own subnet. A subnet, this is a network inside the network. We have a big network. The default is the big network. And then we have subnets. This is a network that belongs to a network. So waiting to be created. Now, if I come here, I should be able to create a second interface. So if you want to create a second interface for your virtual machine on GCE, Google Compute Engine, you need first to create another network. And you have one condition is depending on your CPU. So if you have 2 vCPU or 1, the maximum of network interface is, by the way, you will find it like this, NIC for network interface controller. You can create up to 2, but if you have between 2 and 8 CPU, vCPU, you create as, for example, for vCPU, you can create 4 interface, but the maximum you can create is 8. So even if you put 60 vCPU, you will have 8 interface, but 8 is really enough for you. Even 4 interface is enough, because you will not have 4 networks. You will not have 8 networks. This is really big. So let's check now if, okay, it has been created. Now let's refresh, because I don't have something here to refresh. And let's go now to the network. I should find a new way to create it. Okay, let's come here. And as you can see now, this is 2 vCPU. That means that I can create 2 interfaces. Now, if I come to the network here and to the networking, now, as you can see, add network interface. I can create another one. So if I create here, let's change the subnet. They are overlapping, of course, because when I created the network, I should have create a new one, or in the region, I choose a different region. So let's choose something like this to not have the same network. And then I need to set up the firewall, just so you know that in case you have the habit to create several interfaces in Google Cloud, you need to create first the network and then go to create the new interface. So let me check if you have any questions first. Any questions? Okay, if you have questions, please ask them. So I'm waiting for your question, and to gain time, let me come back here. We talked about the commands themselves, but we didn't talk about the configuration, because you need to understand one thing. In Linux, everything is in this folder. So the configuration of every stuff on Linux is in etc. So if I come here and then I do ls, all these folders and files, generally the configuration file, you will find it ending with .conf. So if it's not a folder, it's a file. So every single configuration is in etc. So if you want now to configure your network, here there is something you need to understand. Same thing goes when it was old school and now the new way. So in old school, you will have a file that is called etc network interfaces. So if I do this, it will tell me, hey, let me come here. This is the old way. Why? Because this one, it was using what is called if-up down. So if I do sudo apt install if-up down, it should install the service, but now it is running, and its configuration file, this is the one, and this is what you find always in tutorials. And if you want to apply this configuration, you need to do sudo systemctl. This is system control or whatever you want to call it, and then you do restart, because every time you configure something on Linux, you need to restart its daemon. This is what we call a daemon. A daemon, this is a program that is running in the background. So in the past, if you change this file, you need to change a service that is called networking, like this. So networking is working with this file. Then there is the second one. The second one, this is called Network Manager. Network Manager, this is when we configure our interface using this graphical interface. So in graphical interface, we use Network Manager. So let's go back to Google Cloud, to Cloud Shell. And let me show you something. Since Cloud Shell is not a graphical interface, that means that we will not have Network Manager by default, because this is not graphical. So if I do sudo nano etc network interfaces, as you can see, there is nothing. Because in Google Cloud, in Cloud Shell, there is no system CTL restart. Check this out, networking. It will tell me, hey, there is no such thing called networking. Now, if I do sudo nano, let's check now about the network manager. So etc network, as you can see, there is no tabulation. Why? Because there is no network manager. But now Linux uses what we call systemd networking. So this is the way that is used now in Linux. So the systemd networkd, it uses a file sudo nano. Here is the file now, systemd, and as you can see, now I have the configuration networkd, and this is where you can configure your IP address. And as you can see, even the syntax is different. So be careful. In the past, when you find this configuration, this works with if up down. So let me come back to my virtual machine so you can see this in details. Because this is, so sudo, let me, systemctl restart network. It tells me you don't have networking. So what I do, apt install if up down. Now, once it gets installed, I should have the networking. So this is the confusion that you get when you switch to Linux. So be careful. When you go to Linux, there is the old way and then there is the new way. So the old way, there are many configurations. You need to convert yourself to the new configuration. Let's check now if it works. See? Now networking works. So if I want to get the status to check if it's okay, as you can see, it's active. So the daemon is running. So if I want to stop it, I just hit stop, something like this. Systemctl stop. Now, if I check the status, you will see that it's inactive. So systemctl, always, here is the syntax. Let me come back here. Always do something like this. Systemctl, and then you do stop or start or restart. This is the basic ones, and then the name of the service. You can add the service or not. Always do that. Every time you change a configuration file, you need to restart the daemon. So in Linux, For example, in Ubuntu, because people found it really frustrating to come back and forth between old technology and new technology in Ubuntu. Let's check this. So if I come here, so Ubuntu system D network D versus, always use this. When you want to compare new technologies with old technologies, use versus. So if I come here, there is a wrapper. That means that there is a program that makes it easier for you. So and here we are. So if I come to NetPlan, in Ubuntu, you will hear about NetPlan. So NetPlan, this is a wrapper. Let me show you something like this. Okay. So the problem with Ubuntu that there is the IFA down, or this one is not used anymore, sorry. So there is the network manager, and then there is the system D, network D. And then to make them both in one single command, we use NetPlan. So NetPlan, this is the easiest way to configure your network interface and choose either use network manager or system D, network D. But if you are in console, by default, you are in system D, network D. If you are in graphical interface, you have network manager. But be careful. I don't say this and then you tell me, hey, there is no network there is network manager in console. Of course, there is network manager in console. And to use this, since we don't have a graphical interface, we use this command, mtuy. So if we use this, as you can see here, we can configure our interface. We can edit a connection, add a connection, and all that. But this is not our subject. So in case you are in console, you just use nm for network manager terminal user interface. It should be something like this. Let's check about its name, nmtuy. Okay, text user interface for controlling network manager. It should be network manager terminal user interface. Anyway, to quit the help, you just hit the Q like this, Q, and you quit the console. So, of course, we always use the ping. Ping, this is to check about our host, if it's running or not. And as I said, when you ping the loopback, you will always have the answer. Why? Because you are pinging yourself. But when you ping something outside the network, it depends on the network. Now, why people use the ping? Because when you use the ping, we are not here. So there is an explanation about this. People like to use ping because ping, it's here. So this is what we call ping. It's called ECMP. And when you use the ECMP, we didn't reach yet the TCP UDP, which means that even if you close the port, if you are using a firewall, you can have the answer from the machine, unless you block the ECMP itself. So when we block HTTP and all those ports, this is not the same way how we block the ECMP. So ECMP, this is the ping. So people call it ping, but ping is the command line tool. But the protocol, this is called ECMP. And in ECMP, we are in layer 3. We are not in layer 4. So be careful. So even if you close your port using a firewall, you can always reach the ECMP unless you tell him, I want to block the ECMP. So if we come back to the network, and then let's check about the firewall in Google Cloud. The firewall, this is the way that we block something or we allow something. As you can see, allow ECMP, this one. And as you can see, there is no port. But let me zoom again. When we allow SSH, we say TCP22. When we allow, for example, RDP for Windows, we say TCP 3389. But when we allow ECMP for ping, there is no port here. So be careful. ECMP, this is not in layer 4. This is in layer 3. This is why we don't need a port. We don't know this information. So let me end this here. So the last command I need you to understand is trustroot. It doesn't exist in Linux by default, so we need to do Trustpath. So Trustpath, this is like show me the path you are using to reach 888. This is like it will ping to different. This is like pinging the my router and then pinging something outside my router and so on. So Trustpath, this is to show me which path it's using to reach 888. But Trustroot, this is not installed by default, but you can install it, no problem. But Trustroot, it needs the sudo. It needs the super user. This is why it was removed from Linux. I don't know why, but you can use Trustpath. There is no problem. So this is all those commands. They are used for debug. And what is the firewall in GCP? If you are using your own machine, you can install it here. Sudo apt install UFW. This is the easiest firewall you can have. But since you are in the cloud, you don't install the firewall in your own machine. This is a separate service, and this is included in IaaS, infrastructure as a service. So this is, you just configure it outside your virtual machine and then control it and affect it, which virtual machine you want to allow or control. So this is our questions. So if you have any question, And of course, with practice, we will discover new stuff. Just so you know what is networking in Linux and the basic commands. And the last command I need you to understand before we end, this is the famous SSH. So SSH, this is a remote shell. So I have this virtual machine, and as you can see, the screen is small. You cannot read. So what I do EPA, and then I get my address, this one. I copy it, and then I do SSH. So 192.1, you get this really quick. 192.122.92, 168.122, and 92. I say yes, and then I type my password. And then I'm inside, check this out, I'm inside this machine. So this machine, it's called Aliane VM Lubuntu, and I'm here. But if I want to exit, I will come back to Aliane Asus. So there are, if you want to get to a distant machine, you just type SSH and the address. Now, if you want to use a user, you type the name of the user and you add the @ and then you add the IP address. And if the port changed, you need to precise here, because by default this is 22. So if you want to change the port where someone is using something like this for security reasons, by default, you can just leave it like this. It will tell you, give me his password, you type his password, and you are inside this virtual machine. So this is it. I hope you understood something about Linux. Of course, we will see all that in future. And remember, install Virt Manager. So Virt Manager, this is it uses KVM and libvirt, which is used by Google. So you will understand better how, check this out just before we end. So if I come back here, and then I want to add the hardware, and as you can see, this is using Virtue. So even the disk, if I come to the disk, I add the new hardware, and then I tell him I want to add a disk. Where is it? Controller, parallel, USB, graphic input, storage. Yeah, this is by default, sorry. And as you can see, this is Virtue. So you have SATA, SCSI, USB, and Virtue. And Google uses also Virtue. So Google Cloud uses Virt.io, which is in constant development, which is the future. So if you want to learn about cloud, go with Virt Manager or Cockpit. And then once you finish, you can understand how cloud works. If you are new to virtualization, don't go, it's just an advice, don't go to virtual machine and to VirtualBox and VMware. Just go to Virt Manager. This is open source, and it will make you understand how KVM and libvirt works, which is the same that is used in cloud. If you don't have any questions, then I think, okay, so if you don't have questions, thank you very much. ثنمير ثنون. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته.